Welcome to the National Electrical and Communications Association and the Fair Work Ombudsman's electronic seminar for the Electrical, Electronic and Communications Contracting Industry Award 2010. My name is Oliver Judd. I'm the Employee Relations Manager for NECA, and I will also be your Fair Work Liaison Officer. If you have any questions in relation to this video, feel free to contact me on the details that will be provided later on to discuss any of the issues you may have. Please note that this video is supplemented by a guide to the Modern Award and the National Employment Standards. We recommend that you have a copy available with you during the video to assist you to understand the scenarios that are dealt with. To obtain a copy, simply fill your details into the form on this page and NECA will get a copy to you. This presentation is broken into chapters, each containing an explanation of each of the National Employment Standards, or NES, and an explanation of the more critical provisions of the Electrical, Electronic and Communications Contracting Award 2010. It is important that you understand the obligations outlined in this video, as there are significant fines that can be imposed where businesses do not comply. This chapter deals with fares, travel and distant work allowances. Fares, travel, distant work allowances. Similar to previous awards, the Modern Award provides for fare and travel allowance. A travel time allowance is payable to employees when required by the employer to start and/or cease work at the job site. The allowance must also be paid for rostered days off. The travel time allowance is not payable where an employee commences and finishes work at the employer's registered office or depot. The Modern Award also provides for two types of start and finish on the job allowance, or otherwise known as fare allowance. Firstly, where an employee is required to travel to a job site which is within a 50-kilometre radius from the employer's registered office or depot, the employee shall be entitled to a fare allowance of $16.25 each day. Where the job site is situated more than 50 kilometres from the employer's registered office or depot, the employee shall be entitled to payment of the fare allowance of $16.25 plus a payment for travelling time. The travelling time payment is calculated on a quarter of an hour basis for time spent by the employee travelling in excess of 50 kilometres from the employee's home. In addition, the employee will be entitled to payment for incidental expenses actually incurred. Take for example the situation where an employee has travelled for 11 minutes beyond the 50-kilometre radius from the employee's home. The employee shall be entitled to a payment equivalent to 15 minutes of their all-purpose rate of pay. Secondly, where an employer offers to provide transport free of charge, whether from the employee's home or the employer's registered office or depot, the employee shall be entitled to the second type of fare allowance, being $2.50 per day. For the purposes of this clause, an employer must not have more than one registered office or depot within a 50-kilometre radius. The Modern Award also provides that an employer may have to pay a motor vehicle allowance to employees on a per-kilometre basis as compensation for expenses where the employee, by agreement with their employer, uses their own motor vehicle in the following cases. 1. For the distance of the employee's journey which is in excess of the distance of the journey between the employee's home and their workshop or depot, where the employee starts or finishes work at a job away from their workshop or depot. 2. For the distance of the employee's journey where the employee is recalled to work overtime after leaving their employer's business. Or 3. For the distance of the employee's journey in travelling between their workshop or depot and a job or between jobs. Or 4. For the distance of the employee's journey in travelling to or from distant work. At page 28 of the guide, there are a number of scenarios which deal with these instances. There is a key which is located above the scenarios to assist you to understand how they operate. Essentially, S equals site, D is the depot, and H stands for the employee's home. Scenario 1. Employee starts and finishes on site using his or her own means of transport. The job is situated within a 50-kilometre radius from the employer's registered office or depot. The entitlement is as follows. The employee would be entitled to the travel time allowance of $4.99 per day and the fare allowance of $16.25 per day for travel within the 50-kilometre radius. Scenario 2. Employee starts and finishes on site. The job is situated within a 50-kilometre radius from the employer's registered office or depot. The employer provides transport free of charge, either from the employee's home or from the employer's registered office or depot. In this instance, the entitlement is as follows. The employee will be entitled to the travel time allowance of $4.99 per day. However, in this instance, the employee will receive a fare allowance of $2.90 per day because he's provided with transport from the employer. Scenario 3. Employee starts and finishes on site using his or her own means of transport. The job is situated more than 50-kilometre radius from the employer's registered office or depot. In this instance, the entitlement is as follows. The employer will receive $4.99 travel time allowance. The employer will receive $16.25 for the fare allowance for travel within the 50-kilometre radius. And for time spent travelling beyond the 50-kilometre radius, the employee will be entitled to be paid at their ordinary hourly rate, calculated at quarter-hour increments, plus any incidental expenses actually incurred. Scenario 4. Employee starts and finishes on site. The employer provides transport free of charge, whether from the employee's home or the employer's registered office or depot. The entitlement is as follows. The employer will receive $4.99 per day for a travel time allowance. The employer will receive $2.90 per day as a fare allowance, given that the employer has provided transport. And where the employee travels in excess of 50 kilometres, the employee will be entitled to be paid at their ordinary rate of pay, calculated on a quarter-hour basis, plus any incidental expenses actually incurred. Scenario 5. Employee starts and finishes on site. The employer provides transport free of charge, whether from the employee's home or the employer's registered office or depot. Now, in this instance, the employee will be entitled to the $4.99 travel time allowance, $2.90 fare allowance for being as the employee is provided with a vehicle, and the travel, which is less than 50 kilometres. In this circumstance, the employee will not be entitled to travel outside of the radius because the distance that the employee has to travel from their home to the site is less than 50 kilometres. Living away from home allowance. In relation to living away from home allowances, the modern award provides that when working on distant work, the employer must provide reasonable board and lodging or pay a living away from home allowance per week. Such allowance will not be considered wages. In the case of broken parts of a week occurring at the beginning or the end of a period of distant work, the allowance will be all living expenses actually or reasonably incurred, but not exceeding the actual living away from home allowance, which is currently $398.80 per week. The standard of the lodging requires that employees be put up in a well-kept establishment with adequate furnishing, good bedding, good floor coverings, good lighting and heating in either a single room or a twin room for one employee if a single room is not available, with hot and cold running water. For all meals not included in the cost of fare and accommodation arranged by the employer, an allowance per meal will be paid to the employee. The meal allowance is currently $12.81 per meal. When engaged on distant work for extended periods, employees will be entitled, where practicable, to be allowed to return home for a weekend at least once a month. Where the employee returns home, all reasonable travelling expenses incurred will be reimbursed by the employer, provided that the employee presents themselves for work at the site at the normal starting time on the next working day. The travelling expenses prescribed by this subclause will not be payable to an employee when receiving the living away from home allowance. Thank you for watching this video. We encourage you to watch all the chapters in this series. If you have any questions, you can contact me on the details that are shown, and if you haven't already obtained a copy of the guide, we strongly recommend that you get one as soon as possible.